my question is, now as the specialist that you are and a criminal defense attorney, I get pulled over for something. What are some of the most common mistakes, or what's some of the things I can do to protect myself in order from incriminating myself unnecessarily? Because I'm an idiot. I'm just going to start just telling you, officer, everything since I was 7 years old I've done wrong. What can I do to protect myself?
Well, I'm reminded of the saying that a wise man once said nothing. In other words, it's probably not a poor maxim to say never miss a good opportunity to shut up. Having said that,
using words to say that.
Having said that, another thing that comes to mind, I have seen a lot of videos, a lot of reels, I think is the popular term, various social media platforms, other places where lay people are giving very bad advice about how to handle an encounter with law enforcement.
That's really where my question comes from. I've seen a few of those and thought, that seems like a terrible idea.
Okay. One thing that people should be aware of, judges are really smart people, okay? And you would think that a judge would be a smart person, but one thing that I've noticed over the years is that most people still underestimate them. And the relevance of that point is that the case law recognizes, that police work is where the rubber meets the road.
That's right.
Okay, and this is not like a fair and a kind world out there in the world of law enforcement. And if you're going to have police that are going to be able to enforce the laws, you have to cut them some slack in the way that they handle very volatile and potentially dangerous situations.
In the second, they only have a second to make a decision. Yes,
that's right. Okay, and so a police officer pulls you over and says license and registration, and you roll up the window and lock the door and stick your license on the door. That's not going to fly. Okay, the law is going to give that police officer the discretion to say, no, I need you to roll down your window. No, I need you to unlock your door. No, I need you to turn the car off. Okay, no, I need you to put the keys in the console on the floor, or or give them to me. And there's a lot to unpack when it comes to the law, as far as stop and detention. Of course, as you know, having had 8 years of experience as a police officer. But my advice to anybody, who is being encountered by law enforcement, first of all, to have the right to identify, you, they don't really need to they definitely don't need to have what lawyers know as probable cause. Now I'm getting off in the weeds in technical terms. But what the law requires for them to make an initial encounter and simply identify you is any type of articulable suspicion that they can point to. You're parked out in the middle of the parking lot in the mall. You're all by yourself in the car in the middle of the night. You're sitting there. Is that suspicious? Well, I think most people would say, well, it's a little suspicious, at least. Is this person committing a crime by simply being there? Well, not necessarily, but what does that allow law enforcement to do? Well, can they detain you? Well, the short answer is yes, but only for a moment. It would not be inappropriate for that police officer to simply identify you. So if it's discovered later that a crime was committed, they have some idea who is in that place at a relevant time, so that they have some ability to begin investigation if they discover that later. Now, another thing to keep in mind that most people I think are not aware of, because police officers are police officers, whether they're wearing a uniform or not. But imagine the situation, excuse me, you're walking down the sidewalk and a police officer is walking the other way, or maybe they're riding a bike, like we have bicycle patrol in Salt Lake City, and they stop and say hello. How are you? I'm Officer Smith. Who are you? This is what is known in the law as a level 1 encounter. So in other words, the fact that they're police officers doesn't mean that they can't talk to strangers like other people, as long as their behavior is otherwise lawful. They're not detaining anybody. A lot of people are under the mistaken impression that they're being detained because a uniformed officer is talking to them. But it's not unlawful for a uniformed officer just to have casual conversations with strangers as they go about their business. Now, in order to detain a person, okay, there has to be a reason, and there's many reasons I can think of that would give a police officer grounds to detain a person. But the most common concept that arises in that context is the concept of probable cause. Probable cause has been defined by the appellate courts as a situation where a reasonable person in the police officer's position, okay, in light of all of this facts and circumstances can be observed, okay, would conclude that it's at least more likely than not that a crime has been committed or has been in the process of being committed, and that the person they're detaining committed that. Okay, that is grounds for a detention. And the law in Utah is that police officers can make an arrest, okay, for either a felony or a misdemeanor that is committed in their presence. Okay, they can also make an arrest of a suspected felon if the crime is not committed in their presence and the circumstances don't otherwise require them to get a warrant, such as the suspect going into their residence under circumstances that are not necessarily exigent. But that's usually the context in which a detention arrives. Police officers, have an objective reason to suspect that a crime has been committed. And on that point, I think it's also important for people to know that a lot of people get hung up, say they get pulled over, and they're concerned, well, I got pulled over because of the color of my skin, because I have, tattoos that show, because they didn't like my car, my car had bumper stickers they didn't like, or that, my car is really, tricked out, and they didn't like that, so they picked on me. What the courts do on that question is they've said they're not going to try to get in the heads of police officers to see what's the actual motive is by trying to pick their brain or read their mind. The question the court asks is whether the objective circumstances that the police officer could observe would support the detention, and if the objective circumstances support the detention, they're not going to get into subjective intent.
Perfect.
Interesting. But that's kind of in the nitty gritty. Okay, for your average person, I'm riding my motorcycle, I get pulled over or something like that. And maybe you could speak a little bit more to this. One of the things that I know my dad taught me this, and I'm sure, you go back generations, if you get caught with something or you're getting in trouble for something, in this country, you get a beautiful thing that you have the right to a lawyer, you have the right to a court date. Okay, that's when your fight actually happens. A lot of people think that they can come in and then the reels and whatnot that you're talking about, where these people are trying to recite the law to the police officer, that's not really, okay, number one, they're wrong more often than they're not, but number two, that's not the time for you to have that fight. The best thing that you could do, and the advice I think that you would give to anybody anytime you're doing, is to shut up until you get to the lawyer. Would that be fair?
Yes. And, a lot of people, as you said it well, I think, that is not the forum or the context where you're going to win that argument. My advice to someone would be that, if they feel like the officer's conduct is inappropriate, okay, they might ask for that officer to radio a supervisor, okay, and he may refuse to do it. But if they arrest you and put you in jail unlawfully, what you really need to do is contact a lawyer and then bring a grievance or even a lawsuit against the offending officer or the agency if you feel their conduct is unlawful after receiving a lawyer's advice. But obviously you're not going to win the argument right on the street. The police officer has a right to control the situation for their own safety. Yeah, just don't argue. Shut up.
No, I think that's something that everybody on those, because we've all seen those videos. That's what it is. That's what it boils down to. Like you get to have a court date. You're going to have a court date for this. Don't argue with the cop, because more times than not, you're just going to make it worse for yourself. And then if you piss the cop off, okay, he has, like you said, he has the right to. Now he's really going to be paying attention to what's going on around him, and he's going to write up everything that he can possibly write up.
Yeah, and I think another piece of advice that I would give to people who may face that situation, which will be everyone, I think, or nearly everyone at one time or another, is that police officers are human beings. That may be under the heading of duh, but I think a lot of people would benefit from being reminded of that. These are human beings, and they probably have a family. They probably have a wife. They probably have children. They have people that they love who love them. They want to get home safely and see those people. And they when they have a bad day at work and they carry some of the emotional baggage from the bad day at work home, that affects their family life. These are human beings. I don't want to overshare again. I haven't had a traffic ticket in a lot more than a decade. Doesn't mean I haven't been stopped. But I talked my way out of all the tickets, and it wasn't a law degree that allowed me to do that at all. It was just common sense, and to be courteous, to be respectful, to be cooperative. And now that I've said this, I hope that all those police officers are not watching. They'll come and give me a ticket for sure next time and make it stick. But just simply being.
I heard your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. But simply being polite and cooperative goes a long way, because these are just human beings that want to get home to their families like the rest of us.
Yeah.
The way I look at it oftentimes is like people, when they go to restaurants, they usually treat the people that make their food very well, right? Because you don't want your food to get screwed with. You want to have good food. Why would you treat someone who has the ability to put handcuffs on you, put you in the back of a car, and take you to jail? Why would you treat them poorly? Just treat them well. You'll have a better outcome.
Yeah.
Well, and it goes without saying, a lot of people, would argue with me and say, but there's bad cops out there, and without a doubt, my comment in response to that kind of comment is that. Police departments are operated by municipalities, in other words, cities or counties. And the politicians, such as mayors or county commissioners who are in charge of decision making for operating that entity, one of the big liabilities that they have is if they have an incompetent police force, a police force that routinely violates people's civil rights. That's an enormous liability. And in order to be a municipality that has a police department, you also have to be able to buy insurance policies that insure the police, the police department from complaints, lawsuits from the public, and they've got to be insurable. And so the relevance of all that is, if there is a bad cop, the likelihood that he or she will get weeded out by their own department, I think, is very high. There's bad cops out there. I don't think they last in the system.
Yeah.
That's what I think.